At 55 years old, gospel superstar Kirk Franklin has finally broken his silence about the late Bishop Eddie Long, and what he revealed has left both the church and the gospel community absolutely stunned. This isn't just another celebrity statement. No, these are words that cut deep, words that challenge what many thought they knew about Eddie Long's legacy. And the truth is, the impact of Franklin's confession is already sending shockwaves across pulpits, choirs, and congregations nationwide. For years, Kirk Franklin has been one of the most influential voices in gospel music, a man known for blending faith, artistry, and authenticity in a way that connected with millions. But behind the music and awards, Franklin carried questions, experiences, and emotions he never shared. Until now, why did he stay silent for so long? What finally pushed him to speak out? And most importantly, what do his words reveal about the complicated, untold story of Bishop Eddie Long? Stay with me, because what Kirk Franklin just admitted could change the way you see both men forever. For years, whispers surrounded the late Bishop Eddie Long, rumors of hidden truths that no one dared to say out loud. But when Kirk Franklin finally broke his silence, he revealed something so shocking, so unexpected, that it left the entire gospel community stunned. This wasn't just another headline. This was a turning point, a confession that forced people to question the legacies of some of the most powerful figures in the church world. And let me tell you, what Franklin shared left even his closest fans speechless. We all know Kirk Franklin as bold, outspoken, and unafraid of controversy. But this time, his words carried a different weight. There was pain in his voice. There was truth in his tone. And when the confession was over, even his strongest supporters sat in silence, struggling to process what they had just heard. To understand the full impact of Franklin's revelation, you first need to remember who Bishop Eddie Long really was. This man wasn't just a preacher, he was a force. In the 1980s and 1990s, Long rose to power, transforming a small church into a sprawling megachurch of more than 2,500 members. His influence stretched far beyond Sunday sermons. Celebrities, athletes, politicians, and everyday believers flocked to hear his fiery messages. He was a man of power, a man of influence, a man whose name carried weight in every corner of the Black church community. But as history has shown us, influence often comes with shadows. And when Kirk Franklin finally decided to step into that shadow and speak the truth, everything changed. This is the startling part though. Despite his polished and powerful public persona, there were rumors circulating behind the scenes that things weren't quite as they seemed. Kirk Franklin was starting to gain popularity in the gospel music industry at this time. He transformed the sound of gospel music and popularized it with albums like Kirk Franklin and the Family and God's Property. Franklin respected Bishop Long's leadership and capacity to motivate a large number of people. They frequently crossed paths. Furthermore, Franklin wasn't merely an outsider looking in, which is what sets this narrative apart. He spent a lot of time with Eddie. He went to his church, went to services, and spoke with the bishop face to face. At first glance, it appeared to be a logical pairing of two powerful individuals who were changing their respective industries. However, fate took a surprising turn. Eddie Long was viewed by the public as a well-respected preacher with a strong ministry, but Franklin witnessed things behind closed doors that would haunt him for years. Cracks appeared in Eddie Long's ministry, despite the fact that it appeared flawless on television. His personal life, leadership style, and financial concerns were discussed in whispers. However, since Eddie Long was a powerful man and few dared to openly criticize him, none of this was made public. At the time, Franklin, who had always cherished openness and truthfulness, decided to keep silent in order to concentrate on his own ministry and singing. He was still disturbed though. Despite his silence, he started to see unsettling patterns throughout those years, something that both unnerved him and made him reluctant to speak up. This is where things start to get interesting, because, despite Franklin's silence, the truth he carried became more and more weighty every year. Eddie Long was at the pinnacle of his popularity by the late 2000s. His church was among the biggest in the nation, and his sermons were televised all throughout the country. He was considered untouchable by many. Behind the glitz, however, there were murmurs that became louder until 2010, when they became one of the most startling scandals in church history. Bishop Long was the target of lawsuits from 4 young men who claimed he had engaged in sexual misconduct. They said that while they were teenagers and young adults, he exploited them by using his role as a spiritual leader. The amount of information they shared was the most bizarre. Tales of pricey presents, exclusive vacations, and manipulation passed off as mentoring. Eddie Long's reputation was destroyed overnight. The Christian community was rocked by the story, which was reported by news outlets, talk shows, and even late-night shows. People were split about the affair. Some firmly supported Eddie Long, claiming that the charges were untrue. Others couldn't ignore the unsettling evidence and felt deceived and devastated. However, most people were unaware of the profound impact this incident had on Kirk Franklin, who had viewed Eddie Long as a leader and mentor. Many fans were perplexed by Franklin's quiet throughout this period. But there was a storm lurking beneath that quiet. He had been close enough to see events that caused him to doubt the church's leadership structure, as well as the bishop. After years of keeping these secrets to himself, he was now prepared to share them. Even more startling than the scandal itself was what he later admitted. It was no accident that Kirk Franklin remained silent during the height of Bishop Eddie Long's scandal. Fear, loyalty, and the pressure of being one of the most well-known figures in gospel music all played a role in this difficult decision. Franklin remained silent as the world argued about Long's guilt or innocence, and many questioned why. The weight of quiet was more than anyone could have ever imagined. Let me tell you, later Franklin admitted that he felt stuck during those years. He struggled to balance his need to share the truth with his allegiance to a guy he had once revered. He realized that his statements could ruin relationships, cost him chances, and possibly jeopardize his family's safety if he came out too soon. The fact that Franklin's choice went beyond his self-defense is what distinguishes the narrative. It was about surviving in a field where criticizing influential church leaders may have disastrous consequences. Franklin struggled with guilt in private. He acknowledged that the pressure to remain silent sometimes kept him awake at night. In his heart, he wanted to be the victim's voice, since he realized how real their suffering was. This is the startling part, though. Franklin feared losing his position as a music minister in addition to criticism. He had been establishing confidence with leaders and supporters for years, and it could have all ended with a single incorrect word. He carried this inner turmoil for years, as the religious community descended into anarchy due to Eddie Long's disgrace. Thousands of people spoke up for the bishop, describing him as a man of God who was being attacked. However, others felt deceived, challenging all of their assumptions about church leadership. Franklin was caught in the middle, and every day he was weakened by the silence he chose. The questions only became more pressing when Eddie Long chose to resolve the claims out of court in 2011 without acknowledging any wrongdoing. His ministry was shadowed by the settlement. Many people hoped for answers, but none were forthcoming. Franklin, who had witnessed Long's ascent and decline up close, struggled even more. His faith in church leadership started to erode at this point. He subsequently admitted he no longer viewed Eddie Long as merely a devout man. Rather, he regarded him as a man whose decisions affected a whole generation. Franklin's destiny also took an unexpected turn because this incident permanently altered his perception of church leaders, pastors, and church culture. It becomes intriguing at this point. Franklin acknowledged that he was silent out of both confusion and fear. After years of admiring Eddie Long, he was shocked to learn of such charges against a person he trusted. It broke something inside him, he said, like he was witnessing a spiritual parent fall from grace. He claimed that rather than face the facts, the church seemed to have opted to preserve its reputation. Franklin began to doubt the fundamentals of spiritual leadership as a result of this insight. How could a place that promoted healing and honesty be so willing to cover up suffering? Despite his public silence, Franklin's mind was clamoring for answers, and his heart was heavy. Speaking up became even more difficult for Franklin around this time because he was also dealing with personal issues. He struggled with his own issues, like as addictions and fears, and he didn't feel prepared to face one of the most influential people in church history. However, the shame of remaining silent increased over time. The most absurd aspect is that some supporters viewed Franklin's quiet as treachery rather than strength, which only caused him to back down even more. People were unaware of the profound emotional toll this incident had on him. He carried a quiet hurt that would influence his future choices, since he knew things that were never fully expressed. Eddie Long left behind a complex legacy as his health deteriorated over the years, and he passed away in 2017. Others couldn't forgive him for the suffering and uncertainty his acts created, while others lamented him as a hero. Still silent but thoughtful, Franklin saw all of this from a distance. He later acknowledged feeling as though he had not lived up to his own calling as a truth-teller. He came to see that, even with the best of intentions, silence might occasionally be just as damaging as falsehoods. At that point, Franklin began to get ready for the moment when he would finally speak up. In addition to reopening old scars, what he would tell after years of silence would show something far larger than Eddie Long himself. When Kirk Franklin did speak, his words were weighed down by years of introspection, shame, and quiet. He freely acknowledged how deeply shaken he was by the Bishop Eddie Long incident. He admitted that for a long time, he was unable to make sense of the man he admired in light of the unsettling accusations that had come to light. His confession was about more than just Eddie Long. I assure you, it provided an honest glimpse into Franklin's own experience of suffering, anxiety, and disappointment. It was like watching a whole foundation fall apart. He said of Long's decline from grace, Franklin formerly admired this man and felt that he was called to leadership. Now, however, he was at the heart of a controversy that eroded confidence in the church community. The surprising portion comes next. Franklin acknowledged that his failure to speak up sooner made him feel like a coward. He claimed that he carried shame for years because he felt that his music had failed the very people he was attempting to serve. Franklin's audacity and candor have long been admired by his fans. However, he became more relatable than ever after admitting that fear had prevented him from speaking. He was more than simply a gospel celebrity now. He was a man who acknowledged that he faced the same struggles with uncertainty and anxiety that many of his audience members did. Franklin's remarks demonstrated that his notoriety and power did not save him from experiencing inner turmoil. The stakes were only raised by them. The most absurd aspect is that Franklin acknowledged that he kept quiet because he felt confined by a system that threatened to terminate his ministry and career if he spoke out against influential figures. He claimed that this culture of dread permeated churches all throughout the world and didn't just affect him. He said that too many people remained silent out of fear or devotion. Furthermore, rather than shielding victims, this silence shielded leaders. Franklin shifted the focus from himself to the church as a whole as his confession went on. He claimed that the controversy was about a system that permitted loyalty and silence to take the place of justice and the truth, not just the downfall of one individual. He acknowledged that the Eddie Long controversy permanently altered his perspective on leadership and made him doubt blind allegiance. Franklin declared, "I can't ignore the suffering occurring in God's house while singing on stage about God's grace, because they revealed the truth that many had shied away from." These comments had a profound impact. Despite its influence and preaching, the church had fostered a culture in which appearance frequently took precedence above morality. Franklin's candor shocked both leaders and supporters. Reactions erupted on social media. While some criticized him for waiting so long, others applauded him for speaking up at last. Franklin, however, was aware that this would occur. He clarified that his timing had nothing to do with self-defense. It had to do with clarity and healing. He thought it would have been emotional and reactive to speak out too soon. He was able to process his suffering and speak honestly, not out of rage, but out of understanding by waiting. This is when things start to get interesting. Franklin claimed to have learned a valuable lesson from the stillness. He came to see that the truth endures and eventually must be heard, even if others chose to remain silent. Franklin also talked candidly about how this controversy affected more than just Eddie Long's legacy, the church, or the victims. It had a profound effect on people's religion. Feeling deceived by someone they had once trusted, many believers quit the church completely. Others stayed, but they still carried scars from years ago. The crisis confirmed the younger generation's suspicions that the church prioritized reputation over accountability. According to Franklin, this was a major factor in his decision to speak at last. Even if it was late, he wanted his legacy to be one of honesty rather than quiet. He expressed his hope that his remarks will encourage people to speak up, to question authority figures when needed, and to defend the weak. Franklin did not stop there with his confession, though. He was apparent that the narrative of Eddie Long was only one facet of a larger problem. According to him, the church is a sanctuary of incredible faith and perilous secrets. He claimed that leaders had been shielded, victims had been hushed, and scandals had been covered up for far too long, just to make things seem nice. This is where Franklin's remarks were most impactful. He stated, "The church's response, or lack thereof, was the true scandal, not merely what transpired with Bishop Long." With that remark, His confession became a challenge. He wasn't only recounting an old tale, he was challenging the church to confront its hidden realities and reform for the better. Franklin's last remarks regarding the incident are more significant than anything he had previously said, because he was telling more than simply a story now. A pattern that had been overlooked for too long was being revealed by him. He clarified that Eddie Long's demise was a reflection of the church's own shortcomings rather than a singular tragedy. He claimed that it was about a society where loyalty, image, and power frequently took precedence over the truth, not just about one man's errors. Franklin acknowledged that he was done participating in the church's culture of silence, which he acknowledged had been one of its most destructive factors. He revealed that for many years, he felt a great deal of guilt, not only for remaining silent, but also for seeing silence normalized in situations where justice ought to have been pronounced. And believe me, when I say that Franklin's candor made people reflect more deeply than any song he had ever written. He explained the scandal's emotional toll, claiming that it left behind more than just wounded sentiments. It caused spiritual wounds. He remembered hearing accounts of churchgoers who completely abandoned their faith, not because they no longer believed in God, but rather because they felt betrayed by the people they trusted the most. He clarified that incidents such as these not only damage people's reputations, but also sabotage hope, split communities, and leave behind severe scars that frequently never heal. According to Franklin, this was the thing that devastated him the most, not only Eddie Long's behavior, but also the church's reaction. Many chose to remain silent rather than stand with the truth. They supported a name, a title, or a brand rather than victims. Franklin's confession went beyond criticism, and this is where things start to get interesting. He put out a challenge. He asserted that it was the church's duty to improve, lead with accountability, and cease justifying wrongdoing in the sake of loyalty. He cautioned that more individuals would abandon Christianity entirely, and that scandals like Eddie Long's would continue to occur if these trends didn't alter. Franklin's voice became more solemn as he disclosed that the harm caused by Eddie Long's acts persisted long after his death and would require years of candor, recovery, and bravery to mend. He expressed his hope that his admission would serve as a wake-up call for everyone who had remained silent, including himself, rather than as a condemnation. He acknowledged that fear had ruled him for far too long and that this was his method of regaining control, not for fame, but for the truth. Franklin's audacity elicited heated reactions from churchgoers and fans. While some chastised him for not speaking sooner, others applauded him for finally expressing what needed to be said. Franklin, however, did not duck the criticism. He claimed that since this wasn't about him, he was ready for people to misinterpret him. It had to do with change. He clarified that the day he made the decision to speak up was the day he made the decision to stop defending a flawed system and begin defending those it had harmed. Franklin's admission that he had contributed to that silence was the most absurd aspect, and he used this confession as a means of permanently ending that cycle. Franklin ultimately clarified that his account of Eddie Long was about more than just scandal. It was about courage, responsibility, and atonement. His statements created a potent message that spread over social media, church forums, and gospel circles. The real scandal isn't what Eddie did. The real scandal is how we responded. Franklin emphasized that everyone was accountable, including himself, pastors, and gospel performers. Destiny also took an unexpected turn for Franklin, as his revelation turned him from a silent observer into a voice that encouraged a generation to do better. He remarked, "Titles, fame, and influence should never protect people from truth." This was not merely a historical narrative, it was an appeal for a time when the voice of truth would triumph over fear, when healing would start, and when silence would be broken. Franklin presented his audience with a choice as the story had come full circle: to speak up at any costs or to remain silent as he once did. And as he finished speaking, one thing became clear: no one would forget this confession.